Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Modern Medusa podcast. My name is Dominique DeFalco, and I'm your host. We're really excited to have this third episode today with an awesome guest. She is a phenomenal herpetoculturist from Canada. She is one of the moderators on the Female Herpers and Reptile Keepers group, and she's also just a keeper of some really exciting species. So before I introduce her, I first want to give a huge shout out and thank you to Joe Phelan with Port City Pet. Once again, thank you so much for hosting us on your feed and then also all of your support. And then also just give a huge shout out to Elise Legault for being our first guest. She did incredibly, and we are so grateful for the positive feedback we have received. So without further ado, tonight's guest is Keanna Fox of Saurian. Hi, Keanna.
Hey, Dom.
How are you?
Not too bad. How are you?
Oh, I had a 2-hour commute home in the winter weather of Ohio today, but you're Canadian, so I'm sure that's nothing.
Yeah, I am definitely familiar with winter commutes. Our weather is like minus 40 Celsius right now.
Oh,
so
can you put that in American, please?
Give me 2 seconds.
Let's see. Because to me, I only know 100 Celsius and then I know 0 Celsius. The rest of it is just made up. Although that's kind of like a very American mentality, but
actually, minus 40 Celsius is minus 40 Fahrenheit.
Well, that's damn convenient.
I don't know if you've ever experienced minus 40 Fahrenheit, but if you have, that's how cold basically all of Canada is right now.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate what you guys do for the world, maintaining the polar ice cap and such, but I'm not interested.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't mind moving somewhere warmer. Maybe somewhere where like I can keep reptiles outside or something.
Yeah,
I don't know.
That's the dream for all of us.
Florida looks fantastic to me, but sometimes the reptile laws go a little askew all of a sudden.
Oh yeah, I think just reptile laws in general, especially right now, are all a little askew.
Definitely. We have some interesting stuff happening in Canada, actually.
Yeah, I actually had a question for you. Are you familiar with the current legislation that's on the table in the New York reptile, circle?
No, I'm not.
So, man, my very bad explanation is essentially there is a law that they're talking about to ban all shipping of live animals. So whether it's reptiles, fish, livestock, anything like that, I'm hopeful that it won't pass because it is going to have a huge effect on farms as well as, the pet trade. But there's definitely a fear. And I know that from you specifically, you work with a decent amount of imported animals, and a lot of those may come through the US to get into Canada. So I was just curious if that was a concern for you at all.
Well, actually, that's kind of interesting because the World Protection Organization, World Animal Protection, WAP. We have been referring to them as WAP.
I was trying to keep it family friendly. Yeah.
They proposed something in PEI wanting to ban like all exotics, which most people don't realize includes like their 6-year-old daughter's cute little guinea pig or hamster as well. So I think they're just kind of testing the waters and seeing what kind of reaction that they'll get from the exotics community. But so that's kind of something that Canadians have going on right now. But I know that the people who I import my animals from, the majority of my animals come from Europe, but I do plan on importing from the US this year. I need some booger tophus.
Okay, so what is the common name for people who may not be familiar with that species?
Transpicos ratsink.
Okay, awesome. Those little bug-eyed monsters.
Yeah. I refer to mine as a goldfish on land.
Yes, I love it.
With New York potentially like not having shipping, I know that a lot of animals that get shipped between Canada and the US all go through New York and Toronto. So like those two cities are like really, really key to the reptile communities trading with each other, I suppose.
So in America, in the US, we have what's called USARC, and that is our essentially like the governing body of, it's the United States Association of Reptile Keepers, and that is the organization that helps to keep these laws from passing and to keep people up to date with what's going on from a political standpoint, essentially, in the reptile community. So do you have anything similar in Canada? Is there that kind of communication there?
Well, there's an organization called CanHerp, but I haven't seen any action from them in a couple of years, so I'm not 100% sure what's going on there, but I know that here in Alberta, there's a lot of bylaws changing, outright banning reptiles that are like already banned under our provincial laws. And so just like small communities are just uneducated people that have the power to make laws are just making stupid laws that don't need to exist, basically. But I know that the local herp society, the vice president has been the one making phone calls to, all the governing bodies and trying to get to the bottom of that. So we are really the Canadian reptile community is really, really divided. And like, because we don't have that big governing body to represent us, like USARC, it's really hard to kind of fight some of these laws, because sometimes people just aren't showing up to those meetings where we need to show our representation. So there's certain people like myself and Brandon who definitely try to promote awareness about this kind of stuff and just let the community know, hey, we can't just sit here and like wait for someone else to do something about it, because someone else isn't going to do something about it. And we will lose our privilege to keep a lot of these amazing animals just because uneducated people are making laws.
It's upsetting, but it's important that we're having these conversations and talking about it. So switching gears a little bit, because that's kind of the current events, but I want to talk a little bit more about you and what you do. You mentioned Brandon. So what I neglected to say at the beginning of this podcast is that not only is Keanna a phenomenal herper and keeper, but she's also the co-host of the Canadian Herpetoculture Podcast, and Brandon is her co-host. So do you mind giving me a little bit of information about that? I know you're coming up on, was it 1 year of recording?
Yep. One day I just had an idea to start a Canadian reptile podcast, or just a reptile podcast. I didn't even know reptile podcasts existed when this was an idea in my head. And one of my mentors, Vinan from Canadian Herpetoculture, he's just like, no, do it. Like, be the voice. Like, be the voice for your community. Like, just do it. And I was like, yeah, okay, I'm gonna do this. And then I met Brandon at, I believe, WCRE 2019, which is the Western Canada Reptile Expo. And we just hit it off, became great friends. And because, I don't know, just because we hit it off so well, I asked him if he wanted to be my co-host. And then we just kind of got the ball rolling. And February 8th, 2020, we put out our first episode, and we've been going hard ever since. Yeah, it has been wild, so wild. I never thought that like just kind of like two nobodies could like do something like this, because neither of us are big breeders or anything like that. Like, Brandon had a clutch last year. I got one slug from my strophurus, and I got one really bad ball python clutch where like all of them had to be euthanized, and it was just like the worst first season ever.
That's so frustrating and upsetting.
Well, me and my partner Tyler, we like really tried to not let us, like, we just wanted to turn it into a learning experience, move on, do next season better, grow from it.
That's kind of all you can do. We have these conversations that while this is a hobby, at the end of the day, we're still working with lives, and lives are fragile and precious, and you can't control a lot of what's happening. So I think props to you though for being open and talking about it, because that's something that a lot of people would let their pride kind of get in the way and wouldn't want to, talk about failure, even though it's part of the hobby.
Oh, I have no issues being wrong or admitting I'm wrong. I have no issues sharing my successes, my failures. Like, if someone else can learn from something I screwed up, then that's something that they don't have to fuck up to learn.
So, you started the Canadian Herpetoculture Podcast. You call yourself a nobody. I would disagree. I think I've said it once, I'll say it again, a phenomenal representation of women in the hobby, particularly. You're, one of the moderators in the female herpers and reptile keepers group. You keep some really interesting species, which we'll get into a little bit more. But tell me how you got started. What is it that brought you into reptiles? Why were you the weird girl who likes snakes? That's how we all start.
It's always kind of been a family thing for me, which I realize most people like really do not have that. But my grandma had a 6-foot male iguana named Iggy, and then like one day he attacked her. And
not
so
shocking.
What
that sounds like
what I'm
iguana.
assuming is like it was breeding season, and if you know, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So Iggy went to go live with like a relative down like in a different town, and so like I'd see him when we went to go visit there and stuff like that. And I don't know which relative it was because I was just a kid during all this, but we would walk into this room and it was just like green foliage and like fluorescent lights and red lights everywhere. So like there's definitely another reptile keeper in my family. I just don't know.
It's in your blood.
It is in my blood.
You're part lizard person.
And then my father was also super into exotics since before him and my mom got together, and he always kind of had cool stuff, told me stories about his turtles and stuff that he had before him and my mom were together in these big tanks. And when I was a kid, my mom worked at like a gardening center, so we'd bring home the little anoles that were stuck on the plants, just kind of stuff like that. So I just always had like reptiles around.
I think that's so cool and so interesting because especially as a woman in the hobby, it seems like that's not often the story that you grew up with reptiles, especially your grandma having a reptile. I think
my grandma had an unhealthy obsession with like snake print pattern. She would wear head to toe like snake print from like her dress to her high heels.
Oh
like,
my God. She sounds like a badass.
People don't understand. Oh, she was such a badass.
And I mean, I think anyone who can keep an adult male iguana is just like correctly is automatically badass.
No, I wouldn't say it was correctly.
Oh,
this
okay.
Is the 90s.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Keeping's come a long way. Like I remember I was 10. Yeah, I had to have been around 10, and we got an Argus monitor from the pet store. They told us it was a yellow spotted tegu.
Similar, basically the same thing.
Yeah, it was kind of close, but like, so we built it in an enclosure the exact same way the pet store told us to, and it was like
that's a good start.
Glass and chicken wire. And the substrate was rabbit pellets. He had like a human heat pad, and he just lived off of frozen rodents. And like, oh, I feel so bad for that animal, knowing what I know now. And his name was Mr. Lizard, and he did not last long.
Mr. Lizard, that's a good name.
I named him that. He was so mean. I think it's my family's fault that I have a love for like mean animals like tokays, I think.
I think that's awesome though, because that's, tokays, that's an unappreciated animal. That's for sure. I've got
the personality's relatable though.
I wasn't going to say it, but yeah. So, you started with Mr. Lizard, the maybe Tegu, maybe Argus monitor, and kind of how did your collection grow from there? So you're still, how long have you been doing this now? Like 15 years you've been working with animals?
After I moved out of my parents' house, I didn't have reptiles for quite a while until probably I was 20 or so. So I guess it's only like 4 years, but whatever, not the point. I ended up I lived a couple blocks down from a really big, well, not a really big reptile shop, but a really well-known reptile shop. And so I'd just go in there and check out the bearded dragons and stuff like that. And like they had some like really, really high quality animals and just like amazing animals, like green tree pythons out the wazoo, just like eye candy everywhere. Eventually, like I bought a couple bearded dragons, and then like I got into tokays, and then in 2015 I bred tokays for like a year. Me and my partner at the time went our separate ways, so to put. And I got out of reptiles for a couple years, except for just a couple oddball animals that I kept, like my first rescue ever. His name is Bo. He is a boa constrictor, a BI. And I still have him. So I've had him since 2014, I believe. And he's still going strong. He's been the one animal that's always like, I've always kept him through everything, you know? Been through multiple breakups.
It's like, you know, like a good sweater, you know, Ben with you through it all.
Yeah, he's my ride or die snake.
You said that your first rescue. So there's a couple things I want to talk about. One, a potentially controversial topic. I'd love to hear your thought on what you consider to be a true rescue situation. And then also a little bit more about your experience with rescues, because I know you have one right now, or you have two that you're treating, and how you work with those.
Okay, so the way I was rescuing was not the greatest. I was new to the hobby, and like my heart was in the right place, but my wallet wasn't there. You know,
I think that's an important like comment to make really quickly. This is a conversation Keanna and I have had multiple times. For people who don't know, my background with reptiles is actually working for reptile rescue. So I use the term rescue in the same way you would rescue a cat or a dog from a shelter. And I know that's just not generally how people view rescues in the reptile hobby as commonly. So this conversation that Keanna and I are going to have isn't to be rude or dismissive of anyone taking in rescue cases for their animals, but this is based off of a foundation of conversations we've had before. So go ahead with that little disclaimer.
You know, I just wanted to help these animals that I saw being like clearly neglected and like posted online. But like so many of these animals were just like beyond even medical care. So I would like, you know, treat for parasites and this and that, and like have the rescue cal, and you know, like I didn't do the worst job, but like so many of them were just like so beyond death's door and should have just like gone and been put down instead of tried to have been rehabbed.
And that's such an interesting, that's a really tough line to walk with like when it is worth it to rehab an animal, because not only the physical stress it puts on the animal, but the mental and emotional stress it can put on the keeper is sometimes just not worth it.
Yeah, well, exactly. It just, after putting all this work to try and save an animal and having it still pass away, just kind of like it started to get too heavy for me. So I stopped doing the rescue stuff. Like I haven't even looked at Kijiji in years because it's just depressing. And like, you know, I know that like there's a lot of fantastic breeders that use sites like that, and like that's great, like no shade to them, but I just you know, it's just when you see all the sick and dying animals in there, it's just I can't look at it. I need my blinders on. I need to focus on the correct side of the community.
And it could be hard too when you've built a collection of animals from breeders or from more legitimate sources, and bringing in a rescue can be such a worry to your current collection and to your current animals, and such a threat, essentially.
Well, so there was a situation here where we had to go and remove some animals from a province where they were illegal. and relocate them here where they are legal. And one of them ended up having mites. So I ended up with a good fun round of mites in my quarantine room.
Thank God.
Thank God is in my quarantine room, though. But that's exactly why you do that, right? And, you know, mites aren't the worst case ever. Like,
No.
They're just annoying.
But I got lice a lot as a kid, so I'm not that afraid of mites. I used to sit in front of the TV with a head full of mayonnaise. That's how we got rid of lice where I was.
Yeah. I got lice a ton as a kid because I had like hair down to my butt, so I was like, I was prime feasting material. Oh, so like, totally, like, I get it, but like, I don't know, it's easy to treat. Just don't stress it. No need to get mad over it. It's just something that happens with reptiles sometimes. And I think that, like, if you're in the hobby long enough, then mites are going to happen to everybody.
And that's why quarantine's so important.
Yeah. Oh, that's one of the reasons why.
And even like a modified quarantine is better than no quarantine at all. What's your quarantine procedures like, and how does it vary from animal to animal, or what you're keeping in quarantine?
So basically my quarantine room is a different room in the house. I would love for it to be in a different building, but I just don't have that ability right now. As soon as I can, that's exactly what's happening. But
once you move to the US,
maybe we'll see what happens. But so quarantine tools, like supplies, are quarantine supplies. Anything not quarantine is not quarantine. So different sets of like hemostats and all that kind of stuff. If I'm dealing with quarantine animals, they are last on the list. I'll deal with my main collection first, and then the more risky stuff last. And then I use Virkon for sanitizing.
What is that?
So it's a vet grade disinfectant, basically.
Okay.
So I think if it's good for a vet, it's probably good for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
I hope. Because I know that chlorhexidine and stuff like that can be kind of hard to get up here in Canada sometimes. So this stuff I can get from the UFA, which is basically like Canadian Tractor Supply.
Okay.
So, and it's cheap. It just comes in pellets that dissolve it in water. Spray it, leave it for really 10 minutes. Yeah, it's nice because like you don't have to like have it. The bottle's tiny. It's just a tiny bottle, and it like lasts me for months. The solution lasts for a week in the bottle. It needs a 10-minute contact time.
Okay, which is very reasonable.
Yeah, exactly. And like bleach needs a 10-minute contact time as well. So like realistically, it's not like you should probably let your stuff have a decent contact time anyway.
So tell me a little bit more about your current collection. So you said you have the one boa right now that you've had for a long time.
I have so many boas.
so give me a little rundown of what you're keeping, and then I've got a couple particular animals that I want to chat more about.
Okay, so we have some like oddballs, and I guess I'll kind of go through those first. So we got a leopard gecko, we have some tokay geckos, Pilbara monitor, Macklot's python, Pac-Man frog. Her name's Hypnotoad. I love her. She's an albino. Yeah, I think those are just kind of like all the one-off animals. And then I have a couple normal boas, a couple different morph boas. They're all constrictor impaired. No. Yeah. BI. No. Whatever. They're all BIs. And then I have a couple Doomerals boas. Tyler has a ridiculous ball python collection because he's scared of everything else.
I think that's I want to touch on that really quickly, if you don't mind talking about it. So, you know, you kind of came into the current relationship you have with your partner being the one who's interested in animals and being the one with the collection. Can you explain a little bit about how that was like to kind of introduce him to it. And then I also know that you have kids and how your kids interact with your collection would be really nice to talk about.
So Tyler and I got together like 2 years ago. He had like no like reptile knowledge experience or anything like that. And we ended up moving in together, and I had to do some work on my corn snake's enclosure, and I was like, here, hold her. And he's like, no. I was like, what do you mean no? Like, it's a corn snake. Like,
that wasn't an option.
No? Yeah,
it wasn't a question.
And he's like, no. I was like, he had been to my like old place a million times. Like, he knew I had snakes. So I was just like, what do you mean no? Like, I have these animals. Like, and I was like, are you scared of them? He's like, yeah. I was like, we've been dating for how long? And you've never mentioned that you're terrified of my animals?
Oh my God.
And then, so eventually my cousin was like, hey, can you take my ball pythons? I'm over it. And I was like, yes, fine. I will take them and I will rehome them. And then we got them, and Tyler fell in love.
That's so fun. I love it when someone finds their species.
Well, and I didn't have ball pythons before that because like they're just not the species for me. Like it's just not my kind of animal. And so so now I have 30 ball pythons. You know how men are always like, my wife wanted a cat and I said no, so we compromised and we got a cat.
Yeah.
Except genders reversed and ball pythons.
I love it. And then you got 30 of them.
I never wanted a ball python, so I have 30 ball pythons.
Is there any particular morph that he enjoys? Is it more just for fun? Do you have a breeding plan in mind?
Anything like super yellow, like he loves like lavenders and bananas and stuff like that. So he is the light side, and I'm definitely like the dark side of the morphs. Because like
okay.
I figured if he's getting into it, then like I'm definitely gonna like learn alongside with him and help him out. People
can hate on ball pythons, but you have to admit that some of them are just really badass. Well, like they just look cool.
Exactly. And like I'll see something really cool and I'll like message it to him and I'll be like, hey, this could like work really, really neat with like this animal that we have in the future. And so like a couple of my friends have been like, in 5 years, you guys are going to be producing some really cool stuff. And it's just like, okay, that feels good. Like, it makes me feel like I'm at least investing properly in these animals. And like, I like all the colors and stuff. They're neat looking.
And they're fun species to keep. I mean, they don't do a lot, but they're, it's nice. You really do open a drawer of just rainbow whenever you see what's in there.
Oh yeah, exactly. And then like my youngest, she is a snake lover.
Your youngest human?
Yes,
human
my youngest human. Yes. Okay. My proto-human.
Ah, yes.
Yes. My redheaded proto-human. She absolutely loves ball pythons and boas. We'll go over to Brandon's house and he has this like massive female. Her name is Cuddles, and she's like, she has to be like at least 7 foot.
Wow.
And that's like being realistic about the size, not saying like I have a 6 foot ball python kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like she has to be like a healthy 7 foot and like a thick girl.
Love to see it.
And Lily comes down the hallway and she has Cuddles wrapped around her neck, and Cuddles' tail's almost touching the floor and her nose is almost touching the floor. And I'm just like, that snake is too big for you.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God. And she just loved it. Loved it. I think she is going to be a hardcore boa girl when she is older. Right now she has glowfish. We're starting small.
I mean, that's a good place to start, though. I was a fish girl when I was a kid because I couldn't have reptiles. And so I think that's such a great place to start, because I would argue that fish are harder than reptiles. Reptiles, you have to worry about heat and humidity. Fish, it's like absolutely everything
it
under
has
the
to be
sun.
Cycled and everything.
Yeah.
Luckily, I cycled the tank before we got the fish because I at least knew that. And then my oldest proto-human, she got a leopard gecko for her 10th birthday. At first she was like looking at Max Snows and stuff like that, and I'm like, of course you want something this expensive. And then all of a sudden Lisa Ashton of Gecko Place, like hugest shout out to her, she's like one of the most amazing leopard gecko breeders in Canada and like so knowledgeable. She opens the last drawer and it's just this like fiery little normal female, and my daughter is like, that one, she's so pretty, and she's like losing it over how beautiful this normal leopard gecko is. And I'm like, you are my child. You are my child.
Well, there's something to be appreciated about like the animals in their most natural state.
Yeah, like they're great. They're absolutely great. And like I am so happy that my kids have like the same passion about reptiles as I do. Like Autumn, my oldest, she just got Jerry, her leopard gecko, set up in a nice PVC enclosure over the weekend and stuff like that. So she just really enjoys being able to like create the environment and stuff like that for her. So
so do your kids do they assist with, you know, the cleaning, the feeding, and everything that comes with the animals as well?
Lily mainly helps me with the rodents. So she's a great help with the rodents. She fills their water bottles and stuff like that. And then Autumn just kind of takes care of Jerry. She's in that teenager phase.
Ooh, so fun.
So she just lets me know when she's out of food for her gecko, and I go buy her more food for her gecko.
Perfect. Yeah. So it's very much an as needed kind of thing.
Yeah. Like Autumn cleans Jerry's enclosure out every weekend and stuff like that. So like she's a phenomenal little keeper, and like I'm really proud of her. Like Lily likes hanging out with the mice and watching them and stuff like that. So
I mean that's such a cool, you know, learning experience for your kids to grow up with, to see, especially, you know, a woman in the hobby, to see their mom like being a badass doing these cool things, and also teaching them about nature and animals. And I think, you know, the respect for the animals is really important.
Well, when Autumn was like 6 years old, she came home from school. She's like, Mom, I want to be a nature ranger. So I was like, yes.
What is a nature ranger?
I have no clue. I think it's just like
I wasn't sure if it was a Canadian thing.
I think it's just like some kids conservation thing where they can like learn how to do conservation and stuff like that. And I was just like, okay, that's so wholesome. Like she loves animals and like wants to take care of them and stuff like that. And like we already have reptiles and stuff. So
yeah, I think that's great. Do you notice that, you know, it's tough right now with COVID, but with your kids, how do their friends react to coming over to their house and they have the mom who's got all the crazy animals?
I think they're just used to it.
Okay. So I don't know. It's funny because, you know, even I'll have friends come over and they're like, can we see the snakes? And I'm like, yeah, duh. Of course. I want to take them out too. So I wasn't sure how that is for kids nowadays.
See, I grew up with a parrot. So like everyone from like high school, everyone from high school in grade 9, they came trick-or-treating at my house, and everyone like realized I had a parrot. So like even now, like I turned 30 this year, but people are like, do you still have that parrot? And it's like, no, he died of cancer. Like 2 years after y'all learned about him. But it was just like that. Oh my God, how do I turn this off? I'm sorry, I'm so sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
But they just for years they were like, that parrot was so cool, it was so cool, and they like saw it once. So I definitely get like that side of it where like the animals just wowed the other kids, where it's like something so normal for you.
It's funny because there are legitimately days where I forget that I have my animals, like not in a neglectful way, but in a way that I'm just living my life, and then I come home and I'm like, oh yes, I have all of these to care for. So, you know, we've talked a little bit about your the general species you work with. I'd love to talk more about your interest in obscure geckos, because I think that's really cool. But before that, with your love of boas specifically, it seems to be the species you really gravitate towards. Can you talk a little bit about the conversation we had a couple weeks ago about how you're working to advance your husbandry?
Yeah. Okay, so on my show CHP, Brandon and I interviewed Liam Sinclair. He has a YouTube channel called Reptiles and Research. And just after talking to him, I just kind of really wanted to reevaluate how I personally kept.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have our show is sponsored by an enclosure, a local enclosure company. So it was just kind of like the right partnership for us, and that just like really suited like what I wanted to do anyway. So I've been getting new enclosures through our sponsor. They're just like a home business and make them in their garage, but like they're really nice looking, and they take all of my ideas into consideration and apply them to like what I want to do for my enclosures. So my latest build is a 6x2x3 enclosure for my 20-year-old normal boa constrictor that was free.
I think that's so cool, and I love the trend towards, some really dope husbandry and some really, doing the most we can for our animals to make sure that they're not only living their best life, but then we also get to enjoy them more.
Well, like she climbs so much in her current enclosure. Her current enclosure is 6x2x4, but she kind of falls off her branches a bit. So I just want to reduce the height by about a foot. But so like she climbs so much. So I want to do overhead basking or overhead heat with UVB as well. And just like really try and give her something next level. She uses her whole enclosure as it is anyway. So I just want to really step it up, give her the full spectrum lighting, give her plants to crush, because like I know that that's going to happen, but I just want to offer my animals the most that I can. My current goal with my keeping is to get all my permanent animals in full-size PVC enclosures. I don't have anything against racks. I will never come at someone for using racks. I still use racks. But just personally, my choice is I only want to use racks for like hatchlings and grow outs. Anything that's going to be a permanent resident here, I want in a full-size enclosure with full spectrum lighting.
I know I've seen that in a lot of groups I'm in on Facebook, like Reptile Lighting, Advancing Herpetological Husbandry. Is this a trend that you're noticing with a lot of Canadian keepers, or are you kind of one of the first people who's really focused on this?
No, I think it's definitely a trend amongst a lot of smaller keepers, and definitely people that I would consider like micro breeders. The only people that are kind of resistant to the big enclosure idea is like the really, really big breeders, and it's like predominantly ball python breeders. Not like trying to come at anyone or anything like that, but like the people that are like racks are best really just seems to be like the big ball python breeders.
And that's and they've worked for so long that it's hard to say that something new is better than what we know has worked.
I think that all types of enclosures have their places in the hobby. It's just you need to understand how to properly use that enclosure to suit the animal's needs. So like, which is why I would never be against anyone for using a rack unless they're simply like being cruel about the size that they're offering their animal. Like I probably would say something in that case, but like that's not necessarily because like it's a rack. That's just because the people are being kind of shady about the size that they're offering for their animal. That's all.
Talking about advancing your husbandry and talking about like what you're doing in that regard. Another thing you're doing for herpetoculture is working with a really interesting species that not a lot of people are working with, which is the strophurus geckos. So Can you give a little bit of background of what those are for people who may not know about the genus, and then also talk a little bit about why you're so into these kinds of, crazy geckos?
Um, so Strophurus are predominantly spiny tail geckos from Australia. They're just bigger than a micro gecko, so they're a small gecko, I suppose. I'd say most of them are around 4 inches in length, 3 to 4 inches. Um, and I just one day I was scrolling Facebook and I saw this gecko, and it had like this silver colored body with these black spots all over it, and this bold orange stripe on the tail, and these blood red eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, what is that? And it was a Strophurus taenacata. And I was like, I have never lusted after anything so hard other than my man. And him and I have been together since the day we met. So like, let me.
We'll let you have this thing.
Yeah, like I wanted this gecko. There's no morphs.
Mm-hmm.
And this is like one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life. So
when was that?
Oh, 3 years ago, maybe.
Okay, so this has been like a long game for you.
Yeah. 2 years ago, maybe. Yeah, I'd say 2 years ago. It was like around when Tyler and I started living together.
Okay.
But I started talking to an importer here in Canada, Northern Lights Reptile Imports, Ashley Dizan. And she's like, yeah, I can get them from Europe, no problem. This is how much they cost. Send me the money to this address, and like a couple months later I had my geckos.
Mm-hmm.
It was
Did you start with the ones with the bright orange tail? Which species is that?
Yeah, Strophurus taenacata, which are called golden tail geckos.
Okay.
So I started off with a pair of those, totally fell in love. They have such easy care.
Mm-hmm.
18 by 18 by, no, what am I talking about? 12 by 12 by 18 enclosure.
For a pair?
Yes. I'm going to bump it up when I get their new PVCs done, but yes. So just like a small Exoterra with UVB and a light, they just need a 90-degree basking spot,
mm-hmm.
and sand for substrate and vertical branches.
Okay. Is it a very, you say they're from Australia. Are they a more desert dwelling species? They're semi-arid?
Yeah. So this is definitely an arid species. Mm-hmm. They're usually out at night. They hang out on the ends of branches, just kind of like jumping at the flying bugs, eating.
Mm-hmm.
So I use black soldier fly larvae as my predominant food source, mm-hmm. and I just leave the the container of them in the enclosure, because when they turn into flies, it's more of a natural hunting experience mm-hmm. for the geckos. And because they're so rich in calcium, they're an absolutely fantastic feeder.
Mm-hmm. So you started with the golden tail. How many mm-hmm. species are you up to now?
I have 3 species now. I have the Strophurus taenacata, Strophurus williamsi, and Strophurus spinageris.
Okay. Is there a similarity in care for all 3?
Yeah, they're all pretty easy to care for, and they're all pretty similar, so I keep mine all the same. The biggest thing is UVB. Not a lot of people offer it because there isn't very much information on these guys online. Mm-hmm. So it's common for captive species to have a crinkle tail. Mm-hmm. And it's just from lack of UVB. So mm-hmm. That's one thing I really like try to emphasize to new keepers, is like you really need to make sure that you have that. I'd say I know a lot of species cryptic bask, but these guys will sleep right out in the open.
Huh. Okay.
So like these guys are getting like UVB on a regular basis, even when they're sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
They're not shy animals. They have this really cool ability to shoot this sticky, smelly goo substance from their tail.
Oh, like from the tip of their tail? Or more
Okay,
their
so
cloaca area or somewhere else?
no, so they are spiny-tailed geckos.
Mm-hmm.
So all this ew comes out of the spines in their tail.
Oh, and is it poisonous? Is it just sticky as a deterrent?
It's just really foul, sticky ew, like, and they aim for the eyes.
Love it.
Yeah.
Well, it's helpful that you wear glasses then.
But one thing I did discover while I was researching strophurus was that some scientists discovered that if you mix the tail goo with ammonia,
Mm-hmm.
it's highly flammable. I have no idea how that applies to science, but yeah.
I just imagine some like frat guy scientist mixing stuff together and trying to set it on fire.
Oh, yeah, I was like, was that important? Because it never really says why they did it. It just says like
that they did it.
That they made like little gecko goo Molotov cocktails, basically.
Wow. That's one of those random facts that I'm going to be very grateful I have in my head. So thank you.
It will provide you with, I hope you use it as like an icebreaker with a man.
Oh yeah, I'll put it on my Tinder profile for sure. So for anyone who's currently listening, when I say that Keanna and I have talked about this before, that's because we recorded this entire podcast and I screwed up the audio. So anything I'm referring to is actually a conversation we had just about 2 days ago. So Keanna, I know we've spoken before about what you're doing to help with the prevalence of strophurus in the hobby. So can you tell me a little bit more about the group you're working with for people in Canada who keep the species? And then talk to me about why you think this isn't really a prevalent species yet.
I don't know why it's not a prevalent species, because these guys have the easiest freaking care ever. I don't know. I love them. I really love them. They're such like beautiful animals just to look at, and because there's so many different species of them, their looks really vary. And so like there's a strophurus for everybody, I swear.
So are they fairly easy to breed as well?
I don't know yet.
That's true. That's true. From what you've read.
I'm not having too much luck at the moment. But I did talk to the breeder that some of mine came from, and he said that during their second winter is like way better to pair them. So yeah. It's a learning curve, right? Like that's what happens when you get into something that's really not very worked on. I started my Facebook group. It's called Strophurus in Canada, and it's just so people with strophurus can kind of connect. Because there's a whopping 10 members.
Hot damn.
I'm a 10th of the population.
Hot damn. You're in the top 10%. You're in the top 10 of all breeders in Canada.
I believe I have one of the most diverse strophurus collections in Canada. With a whopping 3 species.
Wow. Hot damn, once again.
If that's wrong, like someone please correct me. Like I'm not saying that for clout. But a lot of us have just like decided that we're just gonna trade babies to each other, so like we can get the species that we all want to work with. And there's really none of us are competing against each other or anything like that. It's just, I think we're just all enjoying these species together.
So you said that you imported yours from Europe. Are they a more popular species to be kept over there?
Yeah, I think so. I think most Australian species tend to be bigger in Europe. I don't know why. Probably because it's easier to smuggle there. And like basically
no comment.
Any Australian species was like smuggled out of Australia. So like mine are all like captive bred for like many generations. So
so I'm hoping that you have, fingers crossed for a successful clutch this year. I wanted to transition a little bit and talk kind of about your experience in the hobby in Canada, and how it is to be a woman in the hobby in Canada. I know that you have already mentioned some really important and influential women keepers in Canada, or the woman who helps you with the, I almost said smuggling, with the importing. You have smuggling in my head. So I'd love to talk more about your experience in that regard, and then also, get your thoughts on where women in the hobby are going and how things are going with the group and stuff like that.
So like a decade ago, when I came into like the actual reptile community, there were so many just like really strong female breeders that like were big names in the community. So
were they in particular species or just kind of across the board?
Kind of across the board. Like there's Andrea from Darwin's Reptiles. They had ball pythons, crested geckos, just kind of like all those staple reptiles, as well as more tricky species like false water cobras, and they just really did a little bit of everything. And then Terry with 5-star serpent, she is like the collie-bred queen of Alberta. And like I find a lot of them, a lot of the women in the hobby all do kind of their own thing. A lot of new breeders are like in the ball python market, but I think that's just kind of how the hobby is in general. But any of the women that have like really solidified names for themselves are just kind of, they specialize in their area, and they're just really easy to deal with, easy to work with, super approachable, knowledgeable. They'll spend hours going over stuff with you to share that knowledge with you. So like I had so many just like really strong female mentors like while I came up in the community. So I know that at least locally here in Alberta, I feel like women are really well represented in the hobby. And like there's definitely like the sex, like you definitely have to do with sexism at like it does exist, but I think any of the women that have at least made it in my community have got that thick skin just to like shut up.
Yeah, I think that's like a thick skin that women just kind of develop in general over life, whether you're in the reptile community or not.
Yeah. Well, I had an old boss that told me, she's like, duck feathers, Keanna. I was like, what? She's like water off like water off the back of a duck. I was like, oh, okay, cool. And duck feathers, man. Everything's duck feathers.
It's hard to do, but it's good when you have such strong female influence to like remind you of the importance of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I think the important part is to like always be willing to expand your knowledge and accept new information and stuff like that. But like definitely don't just, if you're like correct on something, like you don't have to like back down just because like a man's talking to you. Like if you can like hold your weight in a conversation, then like hold your weight in that conversation, like,
yeah, and don't apologize for it.
Yeah, exactly. Like so often when I go to expos, like I bump into like a whole bunch of my breeder buddies, and like yes, the majority of them are men, but like I'm still jumping in those conversations with them and like getting in on their level with them, because like we're all here because we love these animals. And I don't care what's between your legs. I care about the animals in your hands.
Yeah, I mean, you can't say it better. And I think that's why having these conversations and reminding people of that is so important. So I could talk to you forever, but we do have an agenda. So I want to talk a little bit about your business and what you're focused on breeding wise, and specifically about your name, Saurian. So can you talk a little bit about the background of that?
So, Saurian came from my love of dinosaurs. My father used to take me out hiking in the Badlands, and we would go collect dinosaur fossils and just, we just really bonded over our love of dinosaurs. In 2016, he passed away, and so he always wanted to be like a radio announcer.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like part of where the inspiration to like start the podcast came from. And then like I wasn't really breeding when I started the podcast. And then like as Tyler and I started getting more animals and figuring out what path we wanted to take breeding wise, we decided to like launch our page, our breeding program thing. I don't know what you want to call it. And I decided to go with the name Saurian, which means like of or like a lizard.
Mm-hmm.
Dinosaurs, Saurian, you know.
Yeah, and it's a good homage to your dad as well.
Yeah, exactly. And so I just my dad really ignited my love for reptiles. Like I know my dad wasn't the first one that exposed me to reptiles, but like he's the one that like just really like lit that passion fire and like got me addicted like a crack baby to reptiles.
So speaking of dinosaurs, so when I put out my first teaser episode, you really liked the story of Grace Olive Wiley, and you expressed that you wanted to teach me about another forgotten woman of herpetoculture. So can we get started on the story of Mary Anning?
Yes, we can. Okay. I want to start with a little tongue twister that is rumored to have been written about Mary Anning, but there isn't concrete proof. But like, if I just wanted an excuse to say this, so
and you've been practicing.
No, I haven't. Okay. She sells seashells on the seashore. The seashell. Oh my God. The shells she sells are seashells, I'm sure. So if she sells seashells on the seashore, then I'm sure she sells seashore shells. Okay, all right. Now that I got that out of my system, let's get into the story of Mary Anning. Mary Anning was born May 21st, 1799 in Lyme Regis, which is in England. She was born into a poor family, which was obviously very common for that age time. She was one of 10 children, and her and her older brother Joseph were the only two to survive out of those 10 children. And
that's a bad clutch.
Yeah, it is. It is. They
not a good joke.
Whew. They did some hard culling. So Mary was actually named after her older sister, who died when she was 4 years old. She burned to death.
Oh.
Yeah, her dress caught on fire while like her mom was like in the other room, kind of thing.
Jeez.
Yeah. So like life was tough back then, you know. Mary's father, Richard Anning, was a cabinet maker, and to help supplement the family's income, he would collect seashells from the coastal cliff beds near their house. Mm-hmm. House, not health. That's not a word. When Mary was 11, her father succumbed to tuberculosis, and he had kind of had a really bad run of luck for like the last couple months. A few months prior to tuberculosis, he fell off one of the cliffs while they were out fossil hunting.
Jeez.
And just like he just had like a real bad go. Like,
yeah,
if I had any kind of luck, it'd be bad luck. So he eventually succumbed to tuberculosis, leaving his widow and his 2 children with like major debt and 0 savings.
Mm-hmm.
Before his death, he took Mary and Joseph on fossil hunting excursions to the cliffs, and the family had a table outside their home where they would sell the seashells and fossils to tourists to, bring additional income into for the family.
Mm-hmm.
And then after his passing, Mary, her brother, and her mother would continue to sell all their discoveries to the tourists, and eventually they would actually get to set up a stall near where the stagecoach stopped at the local inn.
Mm-hmm.
So
is this where the tongue twister supposedly started?
Yeah, I think so. Just because she was like always hunting for seashells and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm not 100%. That song was written in, I think, 1908.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like way after her death that the song was actually written.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me find my place again. In 1811, at 15 years old, Joseph made a significant discovery and uncovered a 4-foot long ichthyosaurus skull.
And what's an
several
ichthyosaurus, for those who don't know, like me?
An ichthyosaurus is a large extinct marine reptile.
Okay.
So they're the ones that look like angry dolphins.
I know exactly which one you're talking about.
Yeah, I figured that was a good description.
Mm-hmm.
And several months after Joseph discovered the skull, Mary, who was 12 at the time, found the remainder of the skeleton.
Mm-hmm.
The skeleton was purchased from the family for 23 pounds, which is equivalent to 3,300 Canadian. So what was like $3,000 American?
Yeah, that's significant.
Yeah, well, especially in that time, right?
Right.
And the family, or not the family, jeez. And it was displayed in England. Now, it was really common for museums and stuff like that to not actually pay the family, and their mother would have to like basically write them angry letters and be like, hey, like, you owe us money, like we're poor. You have our stuff, like, hello. In 1820, Lieutenant Colonel Thomas James Birch, he had purchased a whole bunch of fossils from the family. He became uncomfortable with the family's state of poverty, so he decided to auction off all the fossils that he had purchased from the family. He wrote to the paleontologist Gideon Mantell to say that the sale, and I quote, was for the benefit of the poor woman and her son and daughter in Lyme, who have in truth found almost all of the fine things which have been submitted to scientific investigation. I may never again possess what I am about to part with, yet in doing so I shall have the satisfaction of knowing that the money will be well applied. End quote.
So was he a private collector of fossils at that point?
Yeah.
Okay, and he was offering to sell them to a museum.
You're just auctioning them off to
just in general
whoever was buying them. Yeah. And so the auction raised £400, which is equivalent to about $56,000 Canadian currently.
Wow. 45. Yeah, 50,000. Like
yeah.
I can't do math. Stop bringing up big numbers and expecting me to know.
I'm just as a Canadian, I wrote this as a Canadian.
Do it in American. No. No. I mean, we can Google it.
Yeah, figure it out, guys. You have the power. Mary continued to support herself by selling common ammonites and belemnite shells, and occasionally she would find a rare vertebrate fossil. It's said that she would faithfully It's said that she faithfully combed the cliffs every day with her terrier. And unfortunately, a cliff slide happened and it killed her dog. And as she's like looking at all the rubble around and it's like it stopped at her feet, she realized like how close she came to it being her that passed away while she was fossil hunting. So yeah, well, it was just I guess it was hard work to like get those scientific contributions, right?
And at this time, was her brother still assisting with the fossil hunting?
I am not entirely sure. So one of the issues with Mary Anning is her life wasn't very well documented, obviously because she was a woman in this time period. Mary always had like a kind of like a folklore kind of thing about her. And it started right when she was like really, really little. When she was 15 months old, there were 3 ladies standing beside a tree at the horse races, and one of them was holding Mary. A strike of lightning came and hit the tree. It killed all 3 women, and Mary was knocked unconscious and survived. And they revived her by throwing her in a bathtub of water. I don't know. I don't know. But the local physician said that it was a miracle.
Wow. Yeah, that's a miracle nowadays too.
Yeah. Yep.
Just toss the child in a pool.
Okay. Yeah, right? Like I know. And as she continued to make more important discoveries, her reputation just got even bigger. So in December 1823, she found a complete skeleton of a plesiosaur, a long-necked marine reptile. In 1828, a flying reptile known as a pterosaur. And she even discovered that it was commonly known as a beaverstone was in fact dinosaur poop, which is what we call coprolites now. Because she grew up poor, she was illiterate, but as determined women, I think we all know that like stuff like that doesn't stop us when we really, really want something. She would find scientific papers and handwrite her own copies, including her own illustrations that were rumored to be hard to tell apart from the originals.
Wow.
Yeah, so like I think that's really, really cool. And it obviously taught her to read by doing that as well. When Mary was 27, she was finally able to purchase a home with a small glass storefront, which she named Anning's Fossil Depot. And it was even covered by the local paper. So she's just a little bit more well known, right? And I think for a woman to be written about in those times, I think that was like kind of a big deal. Geologists and fossil collectors from all over Europe and America would traveled to Lyme to visit Mary's tiny little fossil shop. In 1839, she wrote to the Magazine of Natural History to question a claim that they made in an article that a recently discovered fossil of the prehistoric shark called Hybotus represented a new species as an error. Because she had discovered the existence of fossil sharks with both straight and hooked teeth many years ago. And that letter was one of the few copies of her writing that was actually saved and preserved.
That's nice that they have that proof.
It's just like one of the like few things that they actually have. Despite Mary's significant contributions to science, as a woman, she was treated like an outsider in the scientific community. The Geological Society of London didn't allow women as members or to even attend meetings.
But they'll take her credit.
Of course. Unfortunately, due to the sexism, Mary became really resentful after reading paper after paper written by men, being published about her discoveries, always failing to mention her. In a letter, she wrote, and I quote, "The world has used me so unkindly. I fear it has made me suspicious of everyone," end quote.
Wow, that's sad.
Oh, it's just kind of like, gives you that woman scorned kind of feel. And like, she has every right to feel that way as well. Like, she made really significant contributions, and all the men were just like, I discovered this because I am writing the paper.
Yeah, because she can't read and she can't like fight back because it's a woman in the 1800s.
And she's not welcome in the Geological Society.
And she's just the fossil digger. She's not the scientist.
Yeah, exactly. Anna Piney, who's a young woman that who sometimes accompanied Mary while she collected fossils, she wrote, and I quote, "She says the world has used her ill. These men of learning have sucked her brains and made a great deal of publishing works, of which she has furnished the contents, while she derived none of the advantages," end quote. So, like, she definitely made it known that she felt like she was done wrong, and she absolutely was.
That's awesome that she even, like, it's incredible that we're praising the fact that she even said anything, but that's a huge thing that she did to even just stand up.
Well, imagine standing up to, like, the men of science in that time, you know? Like,
I can't.
Like, it would not be, it'd be scary to see how it was received, right? Mary also assisted paleontologist Thomas Hawkins with his efforts to collect ichthyosaurus fossils in Lyme in the 1830s. Mary was aware of his penchant to enhance the fossils he collected. She wrote, and I quote, "He is such an enthusiast that he makes things he imagines they ought to be, and not as they are really found," end quote. A few years later, there was a public scandal, and it was announced that Hawkins had inserted fake bones to make some ichthyosaur skeletons seem more complete. Later sold them to the government for the British Museum's collection without the appraisers knowing about the additions.
Okay, you got to give him some props, because at least he was good at being a fraud.
Well, like, and it wasn't like total fraud. He just like
enhanced it,
spiced it up a little bit, right? Of course.
Yeah,
you know, glitter on that.
We've all done it to a school paper or two, or a podcast.
Again, because Mary was always in poverty, regardless of her discoveries, William Buckland persuaded the Association for the Advancement of Science and the British government to award Mary an annuity, which is known as a civil list pension, in return for her many
contributions. You had this problem last time too.
I know.
Contributions
to the science of geology. The £25 annual pension gave Mary some financial security, but like
not a lot.
No, definitely not a lot. I did not write down what the conversion rate was, but I think it's like $2,500 a month.
A month?
No, a year. Sorry.
Oh, I was like, man, that's not bad. Okay, yeah.
So like really, $2,500 a year isn't helping. Mary died from breast cancer at the age of 47 on March 9th, 1847.
Gosh, I think that's such a shame to me when, like,
she died so young. Like,
yeah, just to hear how young she died and to, you know, to die from breast cancer specifically is like it's just devastating.
It's hard. It's
devastating nowadays, and it's devastating like to listen to it back then.
Well, it gets a little bit more heartbreaking. I'm sorry.
Okay. Thank you for the
warning. It gets better at the end. The end of it's the end is better. Okay.
All right, rip my heart out.
I'm sorry. Mary's fossil work had tailed off during the last few years of her life because of her illness. Now, she was on medication for her cancer treatments, and some of the side effects were, it made it look like she was drunk. And so a lot of the townspeople started rumors that she was like an alcoholic and stuff like that. But like, really, it was just like effects of the cancer medication.
Yeah.
And like, it just really shows how like shitty people can be sometimes.
Yeah, to just, gosh, for that to be what she's known for at the end of her life.
A drinking problem that she didn't even have. Well,
right.
And they made a movie called Ammonite. And in the movie, they make her lesbian.
For what reason?
Views.
All right. Well, God, that's so tough because she was like,
there were so many like amazing lesbian paleontologists and stuff that they could have made the movie, but feature the actual ones. Don't make up lies
yeah.
about someone.
Are there rumors that she was because she didn't get married?
I don't. I like really only heard that from the movie. I haven't heard any other sources of it.
Because I know that's just, especially in that time, that was something that they would, have potentially like suspected.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
After Mary passed, the geological community held her in a really, really high regard.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1846, it was shown when, upon learning of her cancer diagnosis, the Geological Society raised money from its members to help Anning with her expenses, and the council of the newly created Dorset County Museum made Mary an honorary member.
Mm-hmm.
Members of the Geological Society contributed a stained glass window in Mary's memory, which was unveiled in 1850. So it took 3 years to do that stained glass window, which for some reason that I don't know why I thought that was interesting, but
I hope it's pretty high quality stained glass window if they're going to honor her only after her death.
Yeah,
it better be real nice. You can if people are watching on YouTube, they can watch me slowly get more and more exasperated over this story. But if you're just listening, I hope you can hear it in my voice. Like it's a devastating story. You're happy she's getting some recognition, but shit, like she deserved it.
Death.
She deserved it when she was actually doing the work.
Yeah. So after Mary's death, Henry Delabèche, sorry, I can't speak French names, who was president of the Geological Society, wrote a eulogy that he read to a meeting of the society and published in its quarterly transactions. So like their meeting minutes, basically.
Mm-hmm.
It was the first eulogy given for a woman, and
Mm-hmm.
these honors were normally only for the fellows of the society, which did not admit women until like 1904.
Wow.
Yeah. So the eulogy states, and I quote, "I cannot close this notice of our losses by death without adverting to that of one, who, though not placed among even the easier classes of society, but one who had to earn her daily bread by her labor, yet contributed her talents and untiring researches to no small degree to our knowledge of the great Annaliosaurians and other forms of organic life entombed in the vicinity of Lyme Regis." End quote. So, like, you're dead, but, like, here's some credit.
Yeah, without saying her name.
Yeah. Well, he yeah, like, yeah, I guess, yeah, he didn't.
Yeah, gosh, that's, like, good. I'm glad that they recognized her. They recognized her contributions, but damn, am I glad that you're bringing it back up now? Because I hope that this is even like the tiniest part of giving her honor.
To be known. She deserves to like have her name known.
Mm-hmm.
Mary's biographer Shelley Emling noted that this contrasted with some of the prominent geologists who had used her finds, such as William Buckland and Roderick Murchison, who ended up with multiple fossils named after them that she found. The only person who did name a species after Anning during her lifetime was Swiss-American naturalist Louis Agassiz. In the early 1840s, he named 2 fossil fish species after her. I don't speak Latin worse than I don't speak French. So, the fish species were Acrotis anningae, Belanostomus anningae, and another he named after her friend Elizabeth Philpott. Agassiz was grateful for the help that the women had given him examining fossil fish specimens during his visit to Lyme Regis in 1834. After Mary's death, other species, including the ostracod Cythereleoda anningi. Sorry,
you're doing
everybody.
well. No, you're doing well. Keep going.
And 2 genus of therapsid reptile genus, Anningia, and the bivalve mollusk genus, Anningeli. Were named in her honor. In 2012, the plesiosaur genus Anningasaura was named after Anning, and the species Ichthyosaurus anningae was named after her in 2015.
Okay, well, that's nice. That's good to hear. You know that she's getting that credit.
Yeah, I just wish it wasn't like 150 years too late.
Mm-hmm. Her contributions will not go unappreciated.
No, absolutely not. And like, so the reason I thought Mary Anning was so important for like us to talk about was because she discovered so many ancient reptiles, not even dinosaurs, but like she found ancient reptiles. And
right.
I think it's important that other people know about her.
And so what was it that drew you to her specifically? Like, how did you find out about her?
Brandon and I were recording an episode with Dr. James Gardner, who is the curator of paleoherpetology at the Royal Tyrrell Museum here in Alberta.
That sounds like a cool museum.
It is cool. It is so cool. I grew up like going to the museum all the time. Like I thought dinosaurs were like a part of like everyone's life the way they were a part of mine.
Man, gosh, that's so cool.
So I was doing research for the episode with him that was beyond my knowledge of the video game Ark because I took so much of my dinosaur knowledge from video games. I was talking to another friend of mine who is really, really into dinosaurs. And I was like, hey, is there anything that like you would want me to ask this like paleoherpetologist? And he's like, yeah, why was Mary Anning screwed over by sexism and like robbed of all her contributions? We said, I worded it very, very differently.
Of course.
Questions to the museum because they had to get approved, right? And the like Dr. Gardner like crossed some off the list that like he just wasn't experienced enough to answer or like just didn't know the answer or whatever. And one of the questions he knocked off was Mary Anning.
Oh, damn it. So now you're doing her justice here.
Yeah, exactly. Like I just wanted to talk about her. And my friend Mike really wants to listen to this. So
yeah, well, Mike, this one's for you, Mike. Well, Keanna, I appreciate it. We're really approaching our time here.
Yes.
So first off, thank you so much for recording not 1 but 2 episodes, because I freaked out yesterday when I texted you that the audio was screwed up. So fingers crossed this one sounds okay. I want to thank you for having me on your podcast. That was such a pleasure to speak with you and Brandon. And thank you for bringing Mary Anning's story to light. It was great the first time to hear it, and then the second time I picked up on a lot of things I kind of zoned out for. So that was really nice to hear again. I
was a little more fluid this time. I wasn't so panicked.
We both were.
Yeah. Don't worry, everyone. This is the good episode. The other one, like,
don't tell them that. Don't even tell them that. Let them think that this is the bad one and we're just this much better. All right. So if people want to get in touch with you, where can they find you?
You can find me if you search up Canadian Herpetoculture Podcast. I am on all major podcast platforms. You can find the animals that I'm working with on Saurian, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all that stuff. I'm on there for everything. So Google me, you'll find me.
And this podcast hopefully comes out on February 11th, 2021. So what are you doing on February 12th?
Listening to this podcast.
You have a live stream.
I do have a live stream. Oh my God. Canadian Herpetoculture Podcast is going live with Jube Jube the Snake off of Instagram. Okay, not with the snake itself, but her owner, Kayla. I'm sorry, Kayla, I can't pronounce your last name.
It's another French name.
Yeah, it is. But we are going to discuss her experience with nidovirus and it just spread some awareness about nidovirus and how it's probably more prevalent in the community than most people are aware. In another episode that Brandon and I recorded with Dr. Walton, we talked about how it was probably more common in bigger collections than anyone would be comfortable admitting. So I didn't learn about nidovirus until I started doing the podcast. So I think it's just something that's really important to spread some knowledge about.
So if people aren't able to catch that live, will that be on your platforms later?
Yeah, so that will be up on Facebook and on YouTube.
Okay, awesome. So Keanna, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
It's been an absolute pleasure. So for everyone listening, once again, my name is Dominique DeFalco of DeFalco Reptiles, and you're listening to the Modern Medusa podcast. It has been such a pleasure speaking with you this evening, and I want to give another huge thank you to Joe Phelan with Port City Pet for being a phenomenal sponsor and our kind of our podcast, guide as we're working on this journey. So thank you so much. Follow us on Instagram at the Modern Medusa Podcast. And I can't wait to talk at you next week. Thank you.